I think it's all about removing those silos and creating best practices for alignment across these different disciplines and functions. Interestingly enough, I think like a lot of people, I did not know sales was going to be a profession for me. I think I kind of fell into the, the sales, sales career, if you will. I think for the first 6 months, I literally questioned it. I doubted it. I probably talked to my parents almost every day saying, I don't know if this is for me. And now 15 years later, here I am. So a lot of my background obviously started off in individual contributor role, full cycle sales. Learned a lot about the best ways from a sales approach, right? Tactically, best practice on how to sell. Had really great sales training. And at the same time, like learned a lot of like what not to do, right? I saw a lot of great things on what to do, but you also learn a lot about what not to do as well. Early on in my career, though, I knew getting into more of a sales leadership role was what I wanted to do, mostly because I was finding more gratification, more rewarding when I was helping others, when I was coaching others and I saw their success. So I was getting, more fired up and more excited when I saw those around me closing deals because of maybe a tip or a piece of advice or a coaching session I did with them, as opposed to closing my own. So I knew that was the path for me. I found a niche working with early stage startups, building out sales and revenue teams. So I definitely love process. I love data. I love reporting. I love really being able to use data as a guide point to make decisions on how to drive more sales, maximize conversions, whatever it may be. So anything around process, team building, forecasting, I really, really enjoy. And so worked a lot of early stage startups, hyper growth sort of scenarios, built teams. And today I am the chief revenue officer of a company called OnRamp Invest.
Awesome. That's fantastic. So that's interesting. So do you believe that you're kind of better suited for a leadership, sales leadership type role than you were necessarily being a kind of rep?
Yeah, I think so. Mostly because I think it's where my passion lies, like I mentioned, right? Like I think that's, to me, it's always a big distinction. I hear a lot of folks say like, oh, I want to get into sales leadership. And when people have that conversation with me, my first question is why? Because sales leadership, although it seems like it's a natural progression, is an entirely different role with entirely different skill sets. And so being able to put the we before the me is a really big part of that. Not always being in the spotlight. And it can be challenging because in a way you're putting your own success in the hands of other people. Whereas some folks love that IC role because they don't have to worry about others. They can really hone in on their performance. But, for me, for a couple of those reasons, I really knew that leadership and that coaching kind of mentality was where my passions and what I found most rewarding out of the job.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think, really high performing reps don't always make amazing sales leaders. They do sometimes, but you need to have that kind of leadership characteristic within you to go on to be a good leader. So going into the framework of questions that we have, we discussed that we look at driving good relationships between revenue teams, kind of best practices here. So how important do you believe like revenue team alignment is for the overall success of a company?
It's incredibly important, and I think that the way that I'm sort of viewing the success of organizations as it relates to, if we think of revenue metrics, right? We're thinking about growth, we're thinking about sales, we're thinking about retention.
Yeah,
that's not one team, right? It's not just the sales team, it's not just the marketing team or the customer success team. It's also the product team, right? It's also the engineering team, but it's the ability to bring all of these functions under one roof. And not necessarily in a reporting line structure, but the ability to create alignment and clear lines of communication, clear processes across all these different departments to ensure that everyone is doing their job, they're doing it at a high level, and everyone's moving the ball forward. So I think it's all about removing those silos and creating best practices for alignment across these different disciplines and functions.
Okay, so on that then, kind of what are some of the fundamental ways of driving communication between these teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's first and foremost, it starts off with really clear expectations around what's important, right? And it can be specific metrics, can be specific goals. Um, I think part of it also is having a culture of aligning to those goals, although that may not be what you're directly responsible for. So as an example, um, if you're an account executive, right? Now, and you're solely focused on new business acquisition, you may say to yourself, well, I'm not responsible for retaining and keeping the clients happy, but you play a role in that, you play a part in that. And I think understanding your day-to-day job and your responsibility and how that correlates and relates to all the other functions is super important. And it's important to get the buy-in. So that communication around that, I think, is really, really important. But like I said, that buy-in, understanding, and having, whether it's rules, whether it's processes, to create that alignment. So as a new business account executive, if you're going after accounts, you're setting up deals in a way that is putting your customer success and account management team in a really precarious position, right? And you're putting, almost stacking the cards against them, not necessarily intentionally, but because you have a quota for new business, you're doing everything you can to get to that. But I think you have to have a really good understanding of how does you doing your job at a high level impact who's next, right? Like what comes next, and that can be the account management customer success team.
Yeah, that's awesome. And kind of, if on that, then what responsibilities do they share? You mentioned responsibilities briefly there, but kind of what responsibilities do they share? Like, and if not responsibilities, what are some of the common goals, let's say, and kind of what they look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few ways in which you can do it, right? Now, part of what you can do within sales organizations, right? Typically, again, just continuing on the example of a new business account executive, right? They've got a quota, they're incentivized to hit that quota, right? But if you can either build in incentives to drive retention, right? Or they can also play a part in driving retention. Those are great ways to help bring it together. B, you can also, and you should also be having, so again, the cadence can vary depending on the organization, but customer success and the post-sales and pre-sales teams should be meeting, should be collaborating, and there should be one person who kind of owns that, both the success of both those teams, who can really be driving the strategy, the ways of working across these two teams. So again, I'm a big part. I think too many organizations, and it's going to sound super, super simple, but it really does boil down to just communication and alignment on what the North Star is, right? And if you can do that and you can hire the right people, it really does resolve a lot of the issues. What I see way too often in organizations is that these two different teams are so focused on their world, and what their job is. They're not talking to other teams. They're this different departments, and this communication isn't happening, and it's not happening at a high level. So I think it sounds really easy, but just starting there is going to uncover where a lot of the pain points are, where a lot of the challenges are, and then that's where leadership has to jump in and start to kind of smooth out those friction points.
Okay, interesting. So as kind of a CRO for OnRamp now, you mentioned there that you're a fan of all the different revenue teams kind of sitting down and, let's say, looking at reports or whatever. What would be your ideal way of doing that? Would that be like a weekly, monthly, fortnightly process, or is that something like, how would you run that yourself?
Yeah, I think first and foremost is having a lot of these conversations revolve around data is super important, because it's going to start to remove a lot of the emotion, right? And like, especially when you're working, if you take a lot of pride in your work, right? Like emotion is going to sometimes like fall into it, which is okay, and very normal and natural. But I think having some sort of framework and dashboard around those key metrics, right? What's our North Star? What are the 4 or 5 most important metrics us as a revenue team have to be able to achieve, right? So having discussions around them from a data-driven perspective. Like I mentioned earlier too, and this is one of the great things I'm super excited about with OnRamp. We have a product team, we have an engineering team who is craving customer feedback and craving more feedback from the front lines, our client facing teams. And so we're in the midst of actually setting up product office hours where our frontline teams are going to have and we're going to do this every 2 weeks, right? So fortnightly conversation around what are we hearing from the front lines? What are we hearing from our customers? What are the features or functionalities that we may be missing, right? Because if we have a product that doesn't have a great product market fit, or there's demands coming from the marketplace, right, it really needs to revolve around the voice of the customer. And it's great that we have people, right? And again, I go back to people a lot. We've got a product and engineering team that really care about building a product that is marketable and sellable, and then also retainable, right? So again, a lot comes down into people, but again, boiling it down, it's having data to tell you how you're performing against those key indicators. It's bringing in the right people who are going to care about the right things, and then having conversations around all of that. And at the same time, our product team and our engineering team are going to be able to discuss, here's the bugs that we're seeing or that we're fixing. Here's a feature that's going to be rolled out next week. Be ready for it. Customers will be asking about it and training. So it's just, it's removing these silos and making it feel like it's one team who's going after one common goal. And then another, I think, critical piece of this though, is everybody being able to walk away with an action item and an ownership to that, right? So every single time you get out of one of those meetings, product team, here's what we have to go do, and who's going to own that, and who's going to come back to us and tell us updates and feedback, right? And so every single different department, although one team, there's still elements of accountability and ownership.
Okay, awesome. And I picked up on a couple of things there. When you're saying kind of, you strike me as someone who likes to keep things simple. And I think sales, especially when it comes to like metrics, can be super, super noisy, right? It's a really noisy world in terms of there's metrics for everything. And you mentioned, only kind of monitoring maybe 5 metrics that really matter. So I'd be interested in kind of, what would you say are the metrics that as a sales leader you prioritize in your sit downs with your teams and your reps, let's say?
Yeah, it's a good one. And again, I tend to keep it really, really simple because it's easy to overcomplicate it and then dive, kind of get a paralysis by analysis, right? But I think on the sales side, I'm looking at, what's our pipeline look like, and what's our pipeline coverage in month, in quarter, and then also future, right? I think too often you get so much into the weeds of like what's happening now, and you forget to look forward. So I'm a big fan of looking forward. And that piece also kind of dovetails into marketing, and marketing having purview and visibility into that, and me talking with marketing and our CMO and saying, okay, here's where we stand, here's where we stand in the future. Let's create some plays. Let's figure out what we have to do here to either A, keep driving it forward, or B, making sure that we're converting on that. So that's pipeline. Then it's also going to be around net new revenue, net new accounts that we're closing. And then also the adoption, right? So for us, adoption into the platform, activating into the platform is really critical for our retention. So monitoring how our new customers are acclimating into the platform, how they're using it, are they opening up new accounts, right? All these different things. So those are some of the core ones. But then underneath that, what I think is really important, so those are like your key metrics, right? But then underneath that, having those KPIs that lead into that. Because what I also want to be able to see is things around, okay, well, here's our pipeline, right? And then I think this is going to dovetail into some of the forecasting conversations. But yeah, I want to also understand historically around how are we converting that? What does our sales cycle look like, right? So then this way I can kind of manage and it'll manage the revenue that'll lead to a really accurate forecast. But I'm a big fan within a sales process. There are many different steps, many different stages, many different client interactions. And, we're all out here trying to grow sales, right? And that is trying, and again, that phrase is similar to saying like, let's go boil the ocean, right?
Yeah.
But if we can highlight certain moments within our sales process and our sales motion that, well, if we took this conversion, we were able to increase it by 2-3%, what does that do for the rest of our funnel, right? What does that do to their conversions into net new accounts, net new revenue, things of that nature? So, I like keeping it simple, having, you know, a couple core metrics, but I do like to kind of also be able to dive in deeper. We've got a fantastic data analytics team that is able to provide a lot of that data. And that's, I think, one of the most important things I've learned over the years. I've been in organizations where not only was I the sales leader trying to go out there, grow revenue, impact revenue, enable the team, coach, train, all that, build the team, all that sort of stuff. I'm also the one trying to pull the data, build the reporting, make sense of the data. Sales operations, data analytics, I can't stress enough how important those roles are for a sales leader, right? Not having to worry about hunting, combing, farming all of the data. It does wonders where I can look at the data, right? I can have conversations around what it's telling us and then go, then go execute. The amount of time I've spent historically on curating the data is crazy. It's crazy to think.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, sales ops is becoming super important as the years go on. It's like one of the most important functions of a sales team, right? A highly operating one. So
Absolutely.
when we're talking about these metrics, how do you view this? Is this through you go on your Salesforce, your sales ops team creates a report, and then you look at it through that, or do you use a tool? Kind of how would you look at it as a CRO?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because part of the conversation I've had internally recently, and I think this is a great thing I've had with the data analytics team, is don't worry about how hard it is to get. We'll find a way to get it. If it's really, really important for you, we're going to find a way to get it. Now, I think a lot of your data has to live within your CRM, right? I'm a huge believer in that. Anything that's going to fall outside the CRM, manual spreadsheets, is just, I think, a potential recipe for disaster. So I think your CRM has to be a single source of truth. But what we also know is that across all revenue functions, the tech stack is getting greater and greater and greater. And data, in a way, is starting to become siloed in different tools. So especially when you're trying to understand the customer journey, right? If you want to look all the way at your best customers, what they're doing, and what that journey looked like all the way back to the first time they interact with you as a business, it's not going to all live in one tool, right? And if that information is incredibly valuable, having that fantastic operations team and analytics team, they'll find a way to bring it all into, say, like a Tableau, some sort of data lake, data visualization tool to apply all of it. But I do look at a CRM as being a single source of truth.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's why it's kind of important for reps to put all their information in there, even though it's personally it's a bit of a pain, but it's kind of like the Bible, right? It's there for everyone to see.
Yeah,
So
but I think too, though, for the reps, and sorry to cut you off there, but I think
no,
this is
that's
a
fine.
really important one too, though, right? I've been in IC, right? I've been that rep who's like, I do not want to enter more stuff into Salesforce or whatever CRM. Like, the data entry part is so heavy. There's a lot of great tools out there that make it a little bit easier and things of that nature, for sure. But bringing that data into coaching sessions so a rep can clearly see, here's why that information is important for me to include, right? If they see what's in it for them in the long run, and I think coaching sessions is a great way of doing that. So you can show them, you input all of this data. Thank you so much for doing that. Not only as a business do we know what's going on and we can understand performance and how to optimize it, but here's what we can do for you, right?
Yeah.
As an individual seller, if you were to focus on this area of your sales process, we can maximize this conversion. Here's what it does for your quota attainment, right? So definitely being able to come full circle with not just here's the data entry you need to do, but here's why it's important to you and here's how it's going to benefit you, is a critical piece to that adoption.
Awesome. Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's great. And I'm interested to hear your take on this question I have here. So, who should forecasting responsibility fall on? As a CRO and someone who's had experience as VP of sales, who do you think forecasting responsibility should fall on? The reps, sales leaders, sales ops?
That is a fantastic question, and I don't think that there's a one size fits all answer.
Okay.
And in a way, I think that there has to be, so I do think and believe that there has to be accountability across all stakeholders, whether that's the individual rep themselves, sales manager, VP of sales, CRO. I do also take a lot of accountability and ownership where I think, hey, look, at the end of the day, the forecast, I'm responsible for putting the forecast out there. So that's on me, right? At the same time, though, if you are a junior sales rep, right, fairly early on in your career, you need to be coached, trained, and enabled to understand how to forecast accurately. You have to have certain processes and different systems in place. So a rep understands, yes, this is a forecastable deal and this is not, and here's why, right? So I do think that there has to be accountability across all the different stakeholders, because if it's just on one person, especially when you get into a much larger sales organization, that's just too much. It's just not possible. But at the same time, I think you have to have real expectations, right? If I've got a sales rep who's been in the game for a couple of years, to forecast within 5-10% accuracy may not be a realistic expectation. So I'm setting myself up for failure, right?
Yeah.
So I think, again, I'll take all the accountability and ownership in the world, but it's also on me to enable my team from a training perspective, and then also have the right process in place to continually optimize and make that forecast more and more accurate.
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting because I kind of see it as the reps kind of know the human side, and they're the people who come into contact with the prospects on a daily basis. You have the ops people who are data led and kind of history dictates the future, and you have the managers or sales leaders that ultimately are responsible for all of this, right? And they will take the blame if things go wrong. All right. So I definitely agree with you there. I mean, it's a whole, everybody needs to take responsibility, right?
Yep. Yeah. Especially too, right? Like and it has to be a blend, right? To your point, the reps are really close to it, but there's emotion there, right? Like they want the deal to close, like they're almost rooting for
Yeah.
it themselves. And so sometimes you get happy ears when you hear something that when you get, whether it's data ops, right? Someone who's looking at it from a historical perspective and a pure data perspective, or even leadership who is maybe a bit removed from the deal and doesn't have so much of an attachment to it, can offer a bit more of an objective perspective. So again, this is a very specific example, but I think a great example to show it's all about removing these silos, right? Like if I'm just taking my rep's word on their forecast and I'm taking that number to the bank, shame on me, right?
Yeah.
You have to collaborate. You have to be able to bring all these different folks into the conversation. But the buck does stop with me, right? Like I still have to take ownership and accountability. So if I'm not getting myself involved to understand the deals at a very intimate, granular level, shame on me.